Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our first of our series of the Drut Technologies Cloud Independence webinars. I'd like to introduce our presenters. Richard Jakobic, he's the Head of Global Business Development and Sales, and Simon McCormick, our VP of Product Management. And we're happy to have you here to kick off our first session. Simon, next slide, please. Our agenda today is Rich will discuss challenges with proprietary infrastructure and advantages with the open source model, followed by Simon demonstrating how we can migrate VMware storage to Drut Ceph. Finally, Rich will wrap up with our executive summary and next steps. Just a couple things before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and all of your microphones are muted already. And we'd really like this to be interactive. So if you could enter your questions through the Q&A feature, you'll see at the bottom of your screen throughout the webinar, and we'll do our best to get to all the questions. And I'll send it to you, Richard.
Thank you, Katie. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone who's joining us on today's webinar. Simon, if you could advance the slide. I'd like to talk about two important things before we kick off the demo for our webinar for today. One of the things that I'd like to chat with you about are some of the things that we hear from customers that are the key challenges for adopting, implementing, and managing proprietary infrastructure. So there's three things that I want to leave you with today's webinar. The number one challenge that we hear consistently over and over again is the economics or the high cost of getting into the solution, both the upfront fees and the long-term fees. So this is from everything from the hardware and software acquisition to the service and implementation service to get it up and running to the operational costs, right? So these are the license fees, these are the support subscription fees, and this is a very costly solution. And with the recent acquisition last year that Broadcom did for VMware, they've changed a lot of the bundlings and the subscription offerings. So now that they're based on the CPU per CPU basis, it's really escalated the cost, especially when you're deploying a solution with multiple CPUs. It can be very, very costly, not only to maintain, but essentially exit out of this strategy. The second part, which then leads into the second talking point, is the vendor lock-in, right? So as I mentioned with one of the proprietary solutions out there with VMware, they offer a number of different point products, whether it's vSphere, ESXi, VDS, or virtual SAN, and that supports the whole scope of how you manage that perpetual infrastructure from virtualization to storage and management. But unfortunately, that leads to a deeper and deeper reliance on that vendor for features and functions. I remember a few years ago, in a previous life, there was a new hardware drive technology that came out, and that's one of the challenges, obviously, with managing and doing proprietary infrastructure. And then I think further to complicate it from the business perspective is lots of these vendors develop these complex contractual obligations, which not only create the need for the dependency, but it makes it almost difficult, nearly impossible to get out of that obligation, if you want to move in an alternative fashion. And then the last point I'll touch on is the technical nature of this. So often customers struggle with trying to troubleshoot and diagnose problems. They have to get on the support line and go through level one that deals with entitlement, and then they get transferred to somebody else who gathers the information, does a log analysis, and then they try to figure out, which bucket or queue do they put it in. And unfortunately, because of the complexity and nature of the proprietary environment, tracking down what we call the root cause analysis of a problem presents a considerable drain on the time, money, and resources that enterprise customers have, and their staff members should be focused on other things. Next slide, Simon. So I think there's an alternative to the challenges that we just talked about here, and that's looking at an open source infrastructure approach. And I would present to you, there's 3 or 4 talking points that provide distinct advantages for customers who are looking at an alternative path. The first thing I'll point out is feature parity. So one of the things you'll hear from Simon today in the demo is that with the Drut software platform, it's an open source solution. We bring to bear a combination of technologies around Ceph, OpenStack, Metal as a Service, and a managed service that delivers a what I call feature parity production level quality offering. And this, again, brings numerous benefits around a cost-effective solution that helps eliminate the expensive license and subscription fees that we just talked about earlier. This enables long-term cost savings over the proprietary solutions that are out there today. Also, in alignment with my previous comment, the concept of future proofing. So having that flexibility and the innovation through the open source community can deliver at a much faster pace development around features and functions that allow businesses to quickly unlock and take advantage of the latest technologies without being blocked by a proprietary vendor's slow adoption of that technology. And then ultimately it leads to you getting out of that vendor lock-in model that we talked about earlier. And then last but not least, I think one of the strong selling points of our offering is the scalability and modularity of the offering, being able to start small, test different alternatives that map to your specific use cases, and then scale up and scale out as the business requires. So with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Simon, who's going to take you through the product demonstration. And Simon, it's off to you.
So I'm Simon McCormack, and today I'm going to do this little demo. So what's kicked us off down this path to do this series? Actually, we've been talking about it for a while because we had a customer that we basically did a migration for this customer, or began the migration over a year ago. And it was during the Christmas time over here. They were looking to renew some of the support licenses, and they found that the perpetual license that they bought a year ago, they had to convert the perpetual licenses to a yearly recurring license, which caused a bit of consternation. We'd already done transitions for some of their VMs away from VMware, so that gave us a big incentive to make the rest of the transitions. And we thought it's time now we started showing people how to do this. Now, there's a lot of moving parts in this area, and actually it's interesting. I attended a couple of webinars myself recently on the similar subject, and they were all super high level. I didn't really learn much. They just said there's a lot of products on the right and there's products on the left. Mapping them is complicated, and you've got to do a lot of planning. No question. You've got to do a bit of planning if you're going to do a transition. However, we wanted to make this session something useful for you and specific. So we want to go through some bite-sized chunks of actual live work that we can go through and show you the steps, because I think that'll be more helpful. And we'll end up having a series of these where we can join them together, make them short, and show you what's going on. So this setup here, you'll look at. I'm actually on my vSphere client, and I've got this guy, demo test 1. My goal is the life of demo test 1 will be this series of sessions where we're going to transition this VM, this machine, through this cloud experience into a private cloud, out of this into open source, maybe into a public cloud. You know, I've got great ideas about this thing. I have, great hope for this VM's future, so we're going to learn a lot for him. Start off, you see here, demo test 1. He's on data store 1. This is a local data store on the ESXi server. Okay, so he's just a machine on a local data store. What's the first thing you want to do when you want to start doing this transition to open source? It's not as easy as you can't just make things appear in the open source. Imagine this is a production-worthy system. We have to do some steps. We sat down and talked about it, what we've done for our other customers. Get this on open source storage. That's probably the most bite-sized chunk that you can do. So that's what I want to show today. Get it on open source storage. So if you've attended any of the webinars we did in the past, and they're on our YouTube channel, you can go to, you'll see that I deployed a Ceph setup sometime last year. Here's my Ceph setup again. So essentially, I want to create a Ceph data store in that vCenter. And then I want to transition my VMs to that Ceph data store. You make that jump, it's a significant step to getting away from that proprietary piece. There's more steps, and we'll cover them in other sessions. Like I say, I'm going to make a lot of sessions, but I just want to cover this particular storage bit today. So my storage server here, I have 3 hosts, demo DSP 567, and my 3 physical servers. And this is a minimal setup. I have 5 disks between the 3 servers, creating this virtual data store. Okay. So I want to create a data store in vCenter. So how do I do that? First thing we want to do in this Drut Ceph. So this Drut Ceph is essentially pure open source version of Ceph. We've seen enough in Ceph that we want to add some value to it. So that's why you're seeing a Drut Ceph version. I'm going to show you one of the examples in about 10 seconds, why we want to add value. I want to create a file system in Ceph. See, I created some of these earlier. I'm going to create a new one. If you look around the UI, you'll see there's no create file system button. I'm looking for it still. I don't see it. Open source has a lot of values to it. But occasionally you'll get some disadvantage. They may not have the function you want in the way you want it. So we want to help to improve that. That's why it's good to work with a vendor like Drut. We can help you down this open source route. You have to do this via the CLI. So I have to quickly log in. It's the only command I've got to do on the CLI today. So I'm going to quickly log in to my system. And I need to create a file system. I did this command earlier, so I'm going to cheat and not actually type the thing in again, because I would only fat finger it and we'd be sitting here waiting. So what is it, March? Let's call it the webinar 13. Right, so I remember. 13th of March, right? 9th of March. So it created a base file system in Ceph, but I have to do one more command to it. I have to create a thing called a sub-volume group. This is important because this is the name that vCenter is going to attach to. I know this from experience of doing this a few times now. When I get this name wrong, I mess it up. So we're going to be really careful about this step. Webinar 13, and I got to give it a group name. This is the bit that's important. And you'll see where this goes in a moment. Webinar 13 group. Okay, it's happy. Let's get out of the CLI now. There's an obvious thing for us to do is add that command to this screen so you can do it from the UI. If I look at the file systems here, my webinar 13 has appeared. I can go in there, look at it. There's a client attached to it. Ceph has done its job, created this. And there's a volume structure webinar. Volumes webinar 13 group. That's important, as you'll see in the next screen. Now, to get it into vCenter or ESXi, I got at least 2 ways to do it. There's always multiple ways with these tools. I can do it via NFS. I can do it via iSCSI. For this particular purpose, it doesn't matter. I'm going to use NFS. If you've got a super high speed object storage application, you might want to use iSCSI. But I'm going to use NFS for this one. So I go into NFS. You see, I created some earlier. I've practiced this. I'm doing it live, so it's smart enough to practice it a few times, I think. My original idea was I was not going to do it live. I was going to record it and play back. I'm not sure if I can take the pressure of doing it live. And I thought, no, I'm going to do it. So I'm in the create an NFS export mode. So you see, I've come on this screen. Cluster. There's only one cluster in my setup, so I can't use anything. I wanted to do a Ceph file system, not an object gateway. Ceph is probably the most flexible storage system out there, open source. So it has every option you can imagine. It's a really good base for your data. Now you'll see the volume is important. I just created a new volume, my webinar 13. You see how it selected the top one for me? For me, again, I don't like that at all. You should make the user choose this. So I go webinar 13, right? That's my file system. And now I got to get this path. So this path is this volumes thing. It doesn't really explain it for me. If I just type volumes, it'll then help me to autocomplete. And it comes up with webinar. That's the Ceph UI helping me. So I didn't have to type it in and get it wrong. I got this wrong a few times in the practice and of course got lots of errors. Now the sudo is important because that's the thing we're going to expose to vCenter. The vCenter is going to attach to that name. See how my browser's helping me? I mean, my browser is not helping me because it's not actually brought up something I use. It's just browser. Microsoft Edge is being very unhelpful here. I'm going to do exactly the same thing as above. So volumes, webinar, 13 group. This has to be unique on this subnet. So if you've got lots of stores, then you make sure they're unique. I just copied the same formula for this. Now I want to give them read-write access. You can version 4 of NFS. It's the latest version. That's a good version. vCenter allows you to do version 3, which is not good. Much more secure version 4. And then you can pin it down to a specific client if you want. So I can say only this machine can access this. I'm not going to do with clients because I don't want to be here too long. I want to make this short and sharp. So then we do create the NFS export. So I've created this in my Ceph. So now there's a data store in Ceph that is basically accessible to someone to attach to if they got the right credentials. And I think now I'm going to, so let me just ask any questions at this point, what I've done so far.
Yeah, Simon, I think we got a couple questions that came into the Q&A. I think the first question was, what version of VMware are we using today?
Oh yeah, actually that's a really good question. Let me jump to this one. I intentionally picked a couple of versions to show how flexible it is. This is vSphere 8.
Okay.
So this is vCenter 8. It's the latest vCenter that they have. ESXi is 6.7. So I've got a mixture. I've got ESXi 6.7 and a vSphere 8. You can mix the two. I think if you're going to do this transition from vCenter or ESXi to something like Ceph, you may have, you may have just ESXi servers left and you don't have a vCenter. You may be on a variety of versions. So I wanted to show you can actually do this with both, either or both. Actually, it's easier with vCenter, and you can use. I think there's a 45-day trial you can do. So the thing I have to do here to enable this data store to be created is I have to go into. See, I've got data stores I created earlier in my practice session, and I have to create a storage. I can never find it for some reason. New data store. And you see the options you get is I can create an NFS data store, and I'll just point it to. It gives me a choice of NFS 3 or 4. Choose 4. Next, and then you give it a name, the folder I put in Ceph, and then the server data. This is vCenter. I'm going to do it in ESXi to show you, because later on I'm going to go back to vCenter. I'll do something in cCenter, and I'll show you can mix the two. So let me log in. This setup is great because I have like 4 different passwords. Everything has a different password. That's like I've reached an age where remembering passwords is not necessarily easy. Oh, I remembered it. So I've written them all down on my left so I don't forget. So I've now logged into the ESXi server. So there's just one server in this. Why would you want to use vCenter? If I've got 10 servers, it's easy to use vCenter, but I've only got one server, so I can show you the process in vCenter. Go to storage, new data store, mount an NFS data store. Give it a name. So now this name of the data store can be anything, but I might as well call it, I might as well be consistent to avoid confusing myself. Webinar 13, right? Webinar 13 group. The NFS server. So Ceph has a virtual address. You pointed to the virtual address. It's a cluster of machines. It's this guy, 1053.0.181. So I always remember this when I'm doing live demos. I should have used DNS for all my names. You know why I don't often use DNS? For some reason, I remember numbers better than words. If I've got names for things, I'm probably going to remember them all. Numbers I can remember, but I really, it's usually death practice to use a DNS name, but I didn't, sorry. And then the NFS share. So this is that bit that we put in here. This is really important. This is the sudo. So if we go in here, take this one and we edit it, see this bit, volumes, webinar 13 group. That's what it's asking for. Of course, it doesn't tell you that, right? You think about VMware doesn't even know what it's attaching to. It doesn't even know that it's going to a Ceph data store, but it's that. Volumes, webinar 13 group. Now, when I was practicing, I kept doing volume, singular. And if you get that wrong, it just says error, no help, So get it right. And then it wants the username password for the Ceph, right? This is I've got to remember that too. And this is yet another password, you realize. I'm actually going to look it up. Oh, yeah, it's that one. And it'd be really nice if it could ask me again to make sure I didn't fat finger it. I don't really want to show it on the screen. So I've told it to go and attach to the Ceph data store, attach to the Ceph volume, create the data store in vCenter. I'm going to finish. Boom, created. It's very quick. It doesn't take a moment. Now I have a data store. So my webinar 13 group, the 1.4 terabit data store is now available. Now I can start the transition. So my VMs that are on a local disk, now I can transition to vCenter. Is there another question? Sorry, I'm seeing the questions on the left when I'm talking on the right. Is there another question, Richard? I see another question. Do you want to read it out, or shall I read it myself?
Yeah, no. Let me read it back for you. So I think the question that was raised was, what's the advantage of moving the storage to the Ceph data store? But we haven't got there yet.
Yeah.
So I
No,
think
we have. I'm not going to get there. I'm not going to get there. So the interesting thing is the move to Ceph takes a while, and we're not going to wait in this session. We're going to do that in the next session. I'll start it. It'll be fun, but I'll tell you why. Why do we want to move? Is actually an important question, because the way it was in this previous setup, I had it on a local disk. That disk dies, your data is gone. Just putting into Ceph automatically gives you redundancy and snapshotting backup feature that Ceph gives you. So there's an immediate advantage to moving this, even though I haven't moved the compute portion. Our idea is to move this VM compute portion completely to open source, but it'll take a couple more sessions. I go to my virtual machines. Actually, to migrate it, you've got to go back to vCenter. I said I'd do something in vCenter. I cancel my vCenter screen here, go to my VMs, demo test on. He's on data store 1. I'll go action, migrate, change the storage. I'm not doing the compute, just changing my storage. And I'm going to change him to my webinar 13 group. So it's going to push that data. This takes minutes to do. That's part of the reason I was thinking I'll just record all this and play videos. But I figured out a way to do it in the next session. So the next session, I'll start by running that. And then I'm going to move to another step. I'll go into our DSP and show the value of our DSP. I'm going to have multiple things all working in parallel. And I'll try and get them all to finish at the same time. It'll be a fun webinar just to see if I can manage it all happening at the same time. So that is the end of this session. Just a summary of what I did. I created a file system in Ceph, exported it via NFS, brought that data store into VMware, ESXi, or vCenter, and that allows local VMs to now use that shared storage piece that you can then begin that road transition. And I'm going to go back to Richard, I think.
there we go. Thank you, Simon. So I think there's a couple of points we want to summarize from what you heard today and what you saw from Simon's demo. Three takeaways for today. This whole concept of an open source private cloud infrastructure approach, hopefully you'll see is not only practical as an alternative to VMware, but it really helps customers unlock what I call the time, money, resource drain that we talked about earlier with the challenges at the top of our webinar. This helps our customers reduce cost to complexity, drive operational efficiency, and really mitigate risk with this approach. Secondly, I would offer up that adopting this type of an approach, an open source solution as we're demoing here, unlocks numerous what I call strategic and technical benefits to the customer that helps you achieve a higher flexibility, advancements in innovation, and this more scalable and modular approach to building a cost-effective infrastructure for the next gen data center. And then lastly, I think I would summarize and offer up that Drut Technologies provides the software and the services that can help support your VMware migration to an open source operating model. So Simon, if we could advance to the final slide, obviously the call to action and next steps for today's webinar. For those of you that have been following along, please, there's three things that I'd ask of you is number one, we have a follow-up webinar, as Simon referred to, which is scheduled in 3 weeks from today on April 3rd. Please follow the link listed here to get registered so you can attend that session. Secondarily, I would encourage you to go visit the YouTube channel for Drut Technologies, where we post a lot of our content around what we're doing with the DSP and Photonic Fabric and all the other wonderful products in our portfolio. And then finally, if you found this webinar of interest to you, please visit our website where you can go to the Contact Us button. You can leave your name, contact information, and we will follow up with you to schedule a meeting to help explore and start your transition and journey from VMware to cloud independence. So I think with that, I would like to solicit my colleagues, Katie and Simon, any final comments or thoughts for today's webinar before we adjourn?
Just one other thing, if you want to visit our website, To sign up for the next webinar, we also have other events that we'll be at. And any other future webinars will be posted there as well under events.
Great. Thanks, Katie. Simon, any final thoughts on your end?
I'll just see everybody next time.
Great. All right. I don't think there's any other questions. I'm just looking at the queue. I think we're good for today. So I think in the absence of any additional questions, on behalf of my colleagues, Katie and Simon, I want to thank everyone for attending today's call and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.